Things come in waves. Do you remember when 3D hit for cinemas in the 80s, with those blue and red cardboard glasses, only for it to die out and be reinvigorated in the noughties with much better technology? The same thing, of course, happened for virtual reality. In the early 90s, it was pipped to be all the rage, to offer us total immersion in our favourite digital worlds, only for it to die off and come back with a surgence only this decade, with devices like the Oculus Rift and Samsung Gear. In reality, neither of these trends actually died off. They were there in the background, out of the mainstream eye, being improved, refined, and used by those who hung on to and favoured this futuristic view of entertainment. But for me, when someone utters the word VR, my instant thought isn't to those wonderful new devices, which have almost cracked the formula. It's to these massively bulky 90s headsets that few of us got to experience in the day, but so many of us wanted to. This is the world of virtuality, the company whose headsets are synonymous with the 90s virtual reality scene, and we're going to explore it. Now, this video will have two interwoven parts. The first is looking at the history of virtuality and the culture in which it existed. The second is how these early days of virtuality have been preserved to this day. For this reason, you will see and hear footage I recently recorded at the Retro Computer Museum in Leicester, woven into the narrative. Key yourself in and hold on tight. For centuries, people have been searching for ways to escape their lives and experience another. Every story we become engrossed in has this at its core, every image we stare into. It's only natural then that since the inception of media, this has been taken to a new level of immersion, with pioneers seeking new ways to disconnect us from reality and plug us into a virtual reality. In terms of visual media, we can trace its roots way back to the 19th century, when Sir Charles Wheatstone used two photographs taken from slightly different angles to create the stereoscope. Of course, this was a static image, and although monumental at the time, was limited in how connected it could make you feel to the depicted scene. The first real concept of virtual reality as we would know it today would actually be virtual in itself. It was portrayed in a science fiction novel written by Stanley Weinbaum, in which a pair of spectacles gives the reader the ability to enter a movie and become one of the characters. In 1956, cinematographer Morton Heilig dreamt up the Sensorama, in an attempt to evolve cinema to the next level. Really, this was the first VR machine, combining video, audio, vibrations, and even smell to create a realistic experience. Only a few years later, he created the first head-mounted display, known as the Telesphere Mask. Using small TV tubes, it combined film and sound in a package that looks alarmingly close to what we still use today. So it may or may not come as a shock that as early as 1968, computer scientist Ivan Sutherland would take this a step further with the incredibly named Sword of Damocles. Now, here was a device that displayed wireframe computer graphics, was able to track head movements, and even allowed augmented reality with its translucent displays. Here then was really the first virtual reality system as we would know it today. Jump forward to the end of the 1970s, and we find NASA playing around with crash helmets, and Eric Howlett developing the Large Expanse Extra Perspective optical system. This system created a stereoscopic image with a large field of view, allowing the user to feel a true sense of depth and immersion. Under the eye of Scott Fisher, this was redesigned for the NASA Ames Research Center as the View headset. Around the same time this was being created, we had key players such as Jaron Lanier, the man who really coined the term virtual reality, and Thomas Zimmerman, who founded VPL Research, responsible for developing the first commercial virtual reality goggles and gloves. The problem was these devices were way too expensive for typical consumers, with the technology limited to university and professional uses. Of course, wannabe devices like Nintendo's Power Glove would appear on the scene, but these were marketing devices playing into the hands of hype surrounding this emerging world of virtual reality. We know from experience that, in practice, these products are about as far from becoming unified with the machine as you can get. So, with VR starting to be cited as the future of entertainment and the public rapidly wanting a slice of the action, something more accessible was needed, more affordable. Players like Atari had founded a research lab in VR earlier in the decade, but the video game crash of 1983 spelt the end of this endeavour. Now at the other end of this seminal decade, and with the big names seemingly too caught up in their standard gaming devices, it was a gentleman named Dr. Jonathan Walden who would pick up the baton to try and deliver a new perspective into our lives. It was at university in the early 80s when John Walden first heard about virtual reality.
I'd always been interested in computers. In fact, I built my very first computer at the age of 17 from the very first microchips. But it's really when I read an article about how computers could be in the future and the need to interact with computers in three-dimensional space. That's what started me in virtual reality. How are we going to do that?
While still at university and with the support of IBM's labs in Hursley, Hampshire, John initially had to raise funds from family and friends to begin work on developing the technology. John's first prototype machine, called the Roaming Caterpillar, was actually demonstrated on the BBC's Tomorrow's World in 1986.
Now, by looking through that window, you're able to see into the world of the computer, and by wearing the helmet, you're able to see it in 3D.
Featuring a wireframe world displayed on a CRT, but with an active shutter-driven headset to present this world to the user in 3D. You could even navigate within it by moving around the entire unit, which contained a microphone listening for audible clicks emitted from 3 fixed speakers to triangulate its position. It might seem a little crude today, but to the viewing public in 1986, this was cutting-edge technology, and thanks to John and the Human-Computer Interface Research Unit at Loughborough University, it was reality. However, in these early days, investors were still too scared and indeed lacking in knowledge to pour cash into John's vision.
It was a concept to us that was perfectly clear, but to others that we went to for financing, it was crazy. They just couldn't imagine it.
By October 1987, John had teamed up with software engineer Al Humrick, ex-Rolls-Royce employee Richard Holmes, and ex-Marconi employee Terry Rowley to form W Industries, and literally worked from their garages to create a viable commercial product. Using an Amiga 2000 as its base, various prototypes were created, including a system tethered by the top and known as the Giraffe. This unit featured mechanical two-dimensional head tracking. By 1989, W Industries had a prototype that was good enough to win the British Technology Group Award for Best Emerging Technology. It was from this point that virtuality could actually become a reality.
Probably for the most interesting for the man in the street would be the games environment, where we can simulate games. With our system, you can see all the way around, 360 degrees.
The competition netted the team a prize of £20,000 and opened the eyes of several investment firms, including a large but unspecified leisure company, which, although scooping 75% of their equity for £750,000, allowed John and his team to push forward with a brand new decade just waiting for the future to be unleashed upon. With the radically uplifting and exciting 90s upon us, things weren't so inspiring for the VR startup. The controlling share of W Industries was sold to the Wembley Company shortly after their original backer went into liquidation. Thankfully, none of these dealings got in the way of the Virtuality team, who had been engaged in vigorous development, testing, and health and safety checks up until this point.
I needed an artificial horizon.
we're trying to figure out how to put that in at the moment. But of course, what we're not using is the ears for instructions. We're actually changing the board. There's a new board going in that's getting all the faults eliminated from it.
And shortly after, in November 1990, the first stand-up unit was launched at the Computer Graphics 90s exhibition at London's Alexandra Palace. The same palace Sir Clive Sinclair had launched his ill-fated C5 electric car 5 years prior. Seemingly, this was the venue to launch products perhaps ahead of their time. These first units bore the model number 1000 SU, the SU standing for Stand Up, and paired with the launch title DACTYL Nightmare, the public were riveted. Now, unlike the machines that we would become used to, these early models were simply a kind of bench, built into a shell holding all the internal components. A plastic head protruded from the top for placement of the visette when not in use, and an industrial-style plastic mat sat nearby for the player to stand on. This thing wouldn't look out of place in the crystal maze. Of course, an obvious problem with this original kit is the player isn't restricted in their location. They can wander as far as they want before the attached head cords rudely yank them backwards. The first 2 VR systems were sold to British Telecom Research Labs to experiment with networked telepresence applications. It wouldn't be until March 1991 when the 1000 CS, standing for cyberspace, and 1000 SD, sit down, units were launched at a Grand Wembley Conference Centre ceremony.
Today, ladies and gentlemen, virtuality is a reality for the leisure industry.
The first ever production virtual reality systems in the world, these were the machines that would soon filter through to arcades and leisure centres across the world, and the public were queuing up to have a go. Behind the scenes, the team hadn't actually networked this many units together for multiplayer, and although nervous and literally writing code on the spot to keep things together, the unveiling went perfectly, with crowds being able to battle it out against each other until they were thrown off into the bitter existence of reality. It was a revelation.
I've got the gun in my hand here. I hate to do this to you right now, but I missed.
It lobs down. We've made gravity twice what it should be.
You're gone, John. You're history.
And he really was now history. This was a revolutionary moment in video game history, and with machines quickly popping up in arcades, players were quick to sing their praises.
You're in another world simply, yeah? Oh, it was brilliant. It was very good. The graphics are excellent. Brilliant. It was. You just feel like you're in another world. It's funny to shoot down the others.
Even if some looked like they were fighting back severe motion sickness, the Virtuality brand was off to a phenomenal start.
Well, it's completely interactive. I mean, you're actually in the middle of it.
Inside the unit lies a computer donned the Expality. This consisted of an Amiga 3000 motherboard, coupled with 4 MB of fast RAM and fitted with all manner of expansion cards required to drive the VR experience. 2 key cards were dual TMS 32-bit graphics cards, which provided enough grunt to push out the 65,000 colour, 20 frame per second world into each of the 276x372 resolution Matsushita LCD screens, allowing 30,000 polygons per second.
Backwards on here because there's movies in the headset, so this was always reversed. I've got a list of 5 games I can choose from to load from this machine.
The input to these screens is simply RGB, with the actual displays mounted in the sides of the visette and reflected with mirrors. The graininess of the resolution is reduced by a custom convolver which smooths out the pixels. Much like modern hardware, the headset uses lenses to both focus and expand the viewing area onto your retina. We've even got quadraphonic sound and a built-in microphone, so that in multiplayer environments you can talk to your opponents or team members. This is cutting-edge stuff. All in all, this equates to a headset weighing about 1 kilogram. It's no spring chicken. And that doesn't even include the hardware belt you have to buckle onto yourself.
Yeah, I think that's it for you.
Are you in the different reality, in a completely different realm?
I've been transposed into another realm.
So with the user firmly secured within the ring, or pod as it's known, the virtuality visette would be secured into position and your eyes would be treated to a 65-degree at most field of view, seeing this surreal world. Now, 20 frames per second sounds atrocious today, but back then this was an impressive feat of engineering, especially running on relatively humble hardware, and honestly, having tried it during the 90s and again recently, it's pretty convincing.
Go to the pterodactyl, get the pterodactyl to carry you away. Look, get him.
Motion tracking is provided by a polymer's fast-track electromagnetic field created by this ring, with data fed back and forth to the headset to keep everything in sync, and it's actually pretty flawless. DACTYL Nightmare might be strange, but with 2 players, it's also a lot of fun. Still bothers me that they didn't name it Pterodactyl though.
Yes! Oh no, I missed it! I've just fallen off the edge of space!
What are you doing? Oh, there you are, I'm going to get you.
Now, breaking continuity for a second, there's actually a version of this for the Oculus Rift, named POLYGON Nightmare, and it gives you the choice to alternate between the original field of view and the Rift's 110-degree display. Now, the Oculus is obviously a lot smoother, but it's fascinating how playable the virtuality equipment actually is compared to modern-day equipment. If you use the original mode on the Rift, there's really not much difference, well, apart from the horrendous strain on your neck from the considerably weighty visette. But even the lower LCD screen resolution isn't that perceivable. The pixels aren't that apparent, especially when you're dealing with large blocky polygons. John Walden would even note that the compelling feature wasn't the somewhat crude polygon graphics, but the 50 millisecond responsive motion tracking and how immersive that made you feel.
The visual display at the moment is crude. There are these crude cartoon-like characters. That's not the issue. The fact of the matter is, in virtual reality, there is no limit to what we can do. We can be anywhere, anytime, any place. And it's really, that's the issue. It's total escapism.
The handheld space joystick is also tracked impressively well, and some software even made use of a touch glove, allowing you to interact finger by finger with the digital world.
This glove is also connected to the virtual world, and in the same way that my head is tracked, so is my hand. On each finger there are tiny pressure pads. There's also 2 in the palm, 12 in all, and these are controlled by an air pump that's linked to the computer processor. When I close my hand around a virtual object, the pressure pads inflate very slightly, creating the illusion of touch.
Yes, that's right, these gloves had haptic feedback, allowing you to feel and even crush objects in the virtual world. I bet you didn't expect that. All this is really quite impressive for a company who in 1991 still only had some 20 employees and were crafting both hardware and software in-house. It was thanks to a deal with external developers Spectrum Holobyte that a raft of other so-called virtual experiences became available, allowing the player to choose their choice of world before entering.
On target for 3 seconds, you'll obtain missile lock, and a guided missile will be fired automatically.
Now, let me tell you from experience, it's not that straightforward capturing footage from these machines, but after several hours we managed to grab footage from all 9 games for the original set. Here are the ones that you won't see elsewhere in this video. Grid Warriors is a robotic shoot-'em-up for the stand-up machine. Gridbusters is also a robotic shoot-'em-up, but it's in an arena, a bit like Super Smash TV. BATTLESPHERE is a space shoot-'em-up, and it's good if a little disorientating. Exorex was originally penned to be called Walker, but it's a mech warrior game which was incredibly popular at the time. Flying Aces is a biplane style shooter, and the game I played in the 90s. Total Destruction is essentially Destruction Derby, and it's pretty good fun. And VTOL is a fighter pilot game. You can get a modern version on Steam, I believe. They're all pretty playable games, although the best are probably DACTYL Nightmare, which we've seen, and Legend Quest, which we'll get to shortly. At around £40,000 or $60,000 for a fully installed system with gun, these machines certainly weren't cheap for venues to install, but offered a tantalising draw for arcades, who were losing more and more customers by the day, with people now starting to enjoy arcade-like experiences at home on their new 16-bit consoles and home computers. In addition, the Virtuality units often required staff on hand to help customers into the equipment, to attach the helmets, to engage the ergo lock system, and to strap on the bulky hardware belts.
Yeah. It's saying insert credit.
Also, they ultimately had to keep it clean to prevent cross-contamination of bacteria. A slightly cheaper option was the 1000 SD machine, costing about £20,000 or $35,000.
This is...
Oh, look at that!
Now, they marketed it for various reasons. One, you can have a steering wheel on there so you can play racing games.
Yeah.
But also, so lads couldn't have that done to them while they're playing a game and you can't see it coming.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully I never got kicked in the balls, but this was the machine I encountered in the 90s. And it was certainly easier to literally jump in and get going. Just like the 1000 CS unit, the SD offered full head tracking, but with the experience of perhaps driving a racing car, a tank, or even an aeroplane. In most venues, £1 or $1 would get you a few minutes play, although many places opted for $5 or £5 for a specific time period. And so thanks to people caught up in the ensuing VR cultural frenzy, the initial outlay was quickly recouped. I mean, you only had to switch on the TV to find program after program dedicated to this new immersive world. Some of them were better than others.
Better than life it is! Brilliant! Let's play! Keep me in, Ollie.
But regardless, it was also incredibly exciting and riveting. I was absolutely glued to these programs and the hype surrounding them.
I can see there's a button at the base. You wouldn't like to reconsider, would you? No. Oh, all right, as you must.
Virtuality couldn't escape the hype even if it wanted to, and really, it had itself exacerbated it.
This is where the future is. Virtual reality. This is where I look at my most attractive.
If you want to take one of these home, it'll cost you £40,000.
Yes!
Of course, this was also the days of the very early internet, and it felt like computers and technology were starting to take us to new and fascinating realms.
Now that we've come in for a landing, when internauts are online, what's their favorite activity?
Now, I bet that's a rhetorical question, and now you're just going to have to tell us, right?
That's what I'm here for.
It didn't stop in magazines either, with Virtuality themselves issuing warnings not to do anything potentially hazardous after using their VR, due to your mind possibly believing you're still in their surreal dimension. I mean, how cool does that sound? This was the 90s version of mind-altering substances of the 1960s. It wouldn't take long for entire businesses to build themselves around the VR units, with multiplayer gaming centres seen in both TV and real life. Check this out, this is called Legend Quest, and it was the first multiplayer game from Virtual Reality Design and Leisure in collaboration with W Industries.
Hello, I've come about the vacancy for a wizard.
Oh yes, I believe we're looking for a wizard right now. I'll just program you in.
Up to 4 players can enter this fantasy realm, crawling through dungeons whilst avoiding the deep, dark perils. It was a huge success on launch, and many other similar installations popped up around the globe, either at theme parks or standalone setups.
It's like my first teammate arriving. This virtual world is a fantasy adventure, and we each role-play a different character.
That's me in the middle in the red cloak, and there's a suspicious pile of bones on the left.
I could do with some help.
I'll help. Elmo's a brilliant swordsman.
Including this entire society featured on CITV's Bad Influence.
I'm in the headquarters of the Virtual Geographic League. It was from this very same building that some of the bravest adventurers in history set out to explore cyberspace. I've been translocated to the desert planet Solaris 7, and I'm in a 30-foot tall battle mech.
W Industries had made a cool £1 million by the end of 1991 alone, but between 91 and 94, the company would continue to see compelling global sales.
All over the world, we've got systems in over 33 different countries. We've got year-on-year growth of over 100%, and the basic problem we have in the company is keeping up with demand.
Expansion not only occurred within the consumer gaming marketplace, but also the private commercial sector, with various brands commissioning custom experiences and machines, including rehabilitation units devised for children to use after hand surgery in Italy, and the creation of a hang glider simulator for an aftershave company. Simple, bespoke experiences were created using C or Amiga assembler and cost from as little as £10,000 on top of the hardware costs. This is the Hero Glider experience, and it's actually pretty good. You can't control the glider, but it does give you that hero feeling. You know, the one in the testosterone-filled advert where one guy is wearing chainmail and another is slapping aftershave onto his face so hard I'm surprised he doesn't fracture his cheekbones. There was also the Hero Challenge, which was essentially a room-searching game. But here's the thing. Here was an aftershave company using VR to market their brand. W Industries had made virtuality cool. They'd made it accessible, and impressively, they'd made it sexy. These early days saw W Industries and Virtuality shoot to a net worth of over £90 million, becoming by far the top player in arcade virtual reality. When they started out, the UK only made up 5% of industry sales, some 15% for America, and Japan taking up the largest slice of 30%. However, with the company being Leicester-based, these numbers had undoubtedly balanced out. This of course was helped, and most probably the instigator of further cultural references around VR, including the Lawnmower Man and a continued slew of TV programs.
There, build me a board, please. Board forming now.
Hello, Games Master.
Welcome to my consultation area.
But there is another kind of VR which doesn't involve a bulky headset. This is a desktop VR system.
Of course, this fast-changing era was coupled with rapidly changing technology and expectations. 2 points were continually touted by the press and put to Virtuality in routine questioning. The first was the likelihood of home VR devices entering the market, and second was whether the hardware would be improved to make use of advanced 3D graphics and higher frame rates. 1994 seemed to be the year that at least one of these would come to fruition. This is DACTYL Nightmare 2, the race for the eggs, running on the upgraded Virtuality 2000 systems. Just look at those textures. To power such ferocious graphical delights, the Amiga 3000 was abandoned for a system cheaper, more versatile and ultimately more powerful. An IBM PC compatible, sporting 8MB of RAM, an Intel 486DX33 processor, and custom Xpality Pix 1000 graphics card, featuring Motorola 88110 processors, coupled with 16MB of video RAM. Interestingly, there were more powerful options available for a machine, but cost and existing development seemed to be a factor in choosing a relatively underpowered system for the time. The headset had also been shrunk and refined, now weighing a measly 650 grams, and incorporating features not found on even modern hardware, including motorized interocular adjustment and focus correction for each eye, meaning glasses wearers need not suffer. Interestingly, however, the field of view had actually shrunk a little to 60 degrees horizontal and 47 degrees vertical. In line with this, the resolution was also slightly lower at 255 by 378 pixels per eye. However, this was still a much upgraded piece of kit, with the smaller footprint echoing down to the respective stand-up and sit-down units. All in all, making these a tantalising purchase for those who still lusted after the VR experience, but perhaps didn't have the space or money for the older units.
By delivering next-generation low-cost modules and subsystems, the Virtuality Group enabled Universal Studios to lead the way with multi-user experiences.
You might think that these refinements would lead to higher cost, but technology was becoming cheaper, and thanks to previous economies of scale, some £10,000 or approximately $20,000 could secure you a unit. A 3000 unit was also released, based on a more powerful Pentium setup, and including a gun, allowing you to shoot through Quick-Shot Carnival or hammer through 0 Hour, which essentially looks like Virtua Cop. To go with the new systems, a slew of new games were made available, including the incredible Zone Hunter, Ghost Train,
Are you ready for the white knuckle ride of your life?
Buggy Ball, way before Rocket League, and the singular PAC-MAN VR. These games all looked better and played better too, however graphics weren't evolving at the same speed as home hardware, and people were moving away from the arcades. Home technology was becoming increasingly powerful. Sony's PlayStation wasn't far from launch, and VR, although luring and still exciting, had by now lost some of that original spark. Just like the early days of 3D cinema, people were choosing to go back to their easy, conventional roots, where perhaps the gameplay was as good as the graphics.
These two here. Jerry is dedicated to producing high-quality stereo sound, and Tom to moving graphics that allow the programmers to produce effects like this. Good luck. This game is called Cybermorph.
Maybe if virtuality could break into the home market, then that excitement could be flared up once again.
Here's Benjamin Hall on the Jaguar system to play Cybermorph. Let's see how those beastly graphics and intricate moves that only come from 64 bits of mega power feel. Then...
Now, at this point, that kid would normally puke over the camera, the filthy wretch. I've saved us from that horror, but it is perhaps a timely omen to the fate of the home VR market. The Atari Jaguar rolled out in 1993, offering superlative 64-bit graphics and enough power to blow our tiny minds, or so we were told. It's only fitting then that a VR headset would soon follow to make use of this phenomenal hardware, and it would be Virtuality Group, as they were now known, who would take the reins of developing this piece of potentially game-changing, pun intentional, kit. Sega had already announced and failed to deliver their Mega Drive VR kit, mainly due to excessive motion sickness issues, and it looked like the time was ripe to do it again.
It's everywhere you turn. The game completely surrounds you. You move, it moves all around you. Incredible!
Handily, the Virtuality Group had not only been working with Sega to develop their arcade VR hardware, but also with IBM to create Project Elysium, and a PC-based VR system. Elysium was essentially an IBM PC with integrated VR hardware intended for architectural and construction applications. Included was a sleek white Visette based on the 2000 series and a V-Flexor handheld control device, which I'm told is exceptionally intuitive to use, although I personally haven't had a chance.
A new powerful tool for virtual model interaction is the V-Flexor.
Proportional pressure finger inputs allow you to create virtual hands or other manipulation devices. Usable in both hands, the sleeve strap allows easy operation with all the flexibility of control you require.
Tasked by Atari to create the Jaguar headset, Virtuality Group began working on creating a device that would work alongside the Jaguar's somewhat complex internal setup. Announced at the 1995 Winter Consumer Electronics Show, the original prototype was a relatively low-resolution red and grey headset which relied on infrared tracking to orientate the player. This form of tracking caused several issues, however, especially when the infrared line of sight was lost, leading to motion sickness and general unplayability. The Leicester Retro Museum has what is alleged to be the very first prototype, although without the tracking hardware it's impossible to see how bad this actually was.
But was this was a prototype or a production model?
It was originally a prototype, and what I've been told by Richard Holmes was 8 of these were taken over to Japan for a demo. The demo got brought forward, and Atari were told they're not ready.
These initial units weren't up to task, and by Virtuality's own admission, weren't ready. Virtuality were tasked to make a higher resolution version, which actually fulfilled most of its requirements, and can be seen working to this day. However, soon after, Atari Corp would pack up their bags and the project would be dumped, meaning a lot of wasted cash for Virtuality at a time when it wasn't really needed. Project Elysium, along with a few corporate deals, would keep Virtuality afloat until 1997, when it filed for bankruptcy on February the 11th, putting to an end this exciting and seminal chapter in gaming and VR history.
The goal of virtual reality is simple. It's total submersion, complete detachment from reality.
The remaining Virtuality kit, along with their rights, was sold off to Cybermind, a German firm who ran internet cafes, who, as you can expect, also died out, leaving the stock to be sold to Arcadian Virtual Reality LLC in 2004, and then on to Virtuosity Systems, who currently hold the exclusive rights to the SU-2000 and SU-3000 simulators, which are still listed as products on their website, although they acknowledge they are unable to manufacture the systems due to the moulds being lost and the technology being outdated, although they still have 2 machines used for rental purposes. Dr. Walden himself had actually stepped down as CEO and moved to the company's research division in Silicon Valley the year prior, and so continued his extensive work in the field, founding Retinal Displays in 1997 and thankfully continuing to be knee-deep in the subject to this day after founding DigiLens Incorporated, focusing on VR in aerospace, transportation and consumer devices. He also partnered to produce the Philips Scuba Visor and Takara Dino Visor, which were based around the Jaguar VR headset. You can even plug it into a Jaguar, albeit without the motion tracking, and at least you can get an idea of Missile Command 3D, the only VR game developed for the console, so at least it didn't totally go to waste. A quick visit to virtuality.com will find you among John's earlier work and subsequent headsets, with the brand and IP still very much owned by his trusty hands. It's just a shame that some of Virtuality's ideas, like live action characters in a 3D world, didn't have a chance to be fully explored.
Presentation on how we're now able for the first time to generate real-time 3D computer graphics with live video. The video can come from either an MPEG source or a live video source or a pre-recorded source on videotape. This for the first time allows you to have live action characters like me in this world.
or even the online virtual dinosaur experience, which, let's face it, looks about as epic as you can get. Don't tell me that's not a real dinosaur. Come on, for a dial-up dinosaur, it's pretty good. What John and Virtuality Group were trying to create was really ahead of its time, but amazingly these ahead of their time products actually worked, and what's more, were pretty darn incredible.
Firstly, they have goals and motivations. For example, this may simply be to irritate or hinder the participant. Perhaps it could be a situation where the V-actor's help is inversely proportional to the skill of the participant. Alternatively, the goals and motivations of the V-actor may not be at all apparent to the participant.
As for VR, well, just like 3D, we know it's came back. And thanks to the ubiquity of electronic devices and how easy it's becoming to enter virtual new worlds, combined with much more mature technology, I think this time it might actually be here to stay. But what about the original VR kit? Who's taking care of that and ensuring it's preserved for posterity at the very least? Well, you've seen throughout this video that's ultimately why I'm at the Leicester Retro Computer Museum, where I've been speaking to the amazing Simon Marston, one of the last keepers of this miraculous kit.
Welcome to the Retro Computer Museum at Leicester.
Please have much fun here.
Yes, this is the Retro Computer Museum in Leicester and there's a lot to see. But I'm really here to talk to Simon Marston, the man who can with virtuality.
I got my first machine early 2013.
Just no arcade?
No, I found it on eBay.
Oh really?
Yes, it was starting bid £100. 10-day bid, no one had bid on it. I said, I really want that machine. How much for a buy it now? It's a $250 plus delivery. Okay, sorted. It was very dirty when I got it, and it worked. But the second time I turned it on, the screens failed. So I had to replace the screens in the headset. And by doing that, I learnt a lot about the machine. This red one and the green one, although built in Leicester, they were in Canada. We got them for free, but we had to pay for shipping. Right. So we got these over from Canada, and they both worked when we got them, which was quite astounding.
That's amazing.
That one and my second machine at home were in Daventry. Someone was doing a garage clearance and asked if I wanted the computers, basically that computer. I said yes, but I also knew they were built in Leicester anyway, so I've been stalking, as it were, people who used to work at the company, hunting them down and saying, please come and visit me. And as you see on that board, there's many people I've met. They've all given me a bit of information about the amount of times I've had to fix these machines, the amount of people from the original team I've had to ask for various little things. I now have all that information written down somewhere, and a lot of it's in here as well. And generally, I do my best to keep these things going, but I still need occasional help.
Simon has a lot of these machines and has used many parts to create and maintain the working selection you see here. Although with a full garage of components, he might struggle to get more.
My wife says I'm not allowed anymore.
It's really worth taking a trip to the Leicester Retro Computer Museum to see Simon and the team and get hands-on with these hulking machines. After all, sending you guys there is the least I can do, as without them, this video would not be possible. So, massive thanks to Simon for all his help, massive thanks to the Retro Computer Museum, and if you want to see more about the games, then keep an eye on Octavius's channel, as she'll be doing a dedicated video about them. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and have a great evening.
Just a few years ago, people were pretty impressed by a new type of electronic game. This involved hitting a computer-generated ball from side to side, and side to side. Then from out of space came a new type of invader, and for a while things started to perk up a bit. But that was back in the 70s, and things haven't changed a great deal since. Well, we still use flat two-dimensional screens, desperately trying to kid ourselves into believing we're somewhere else. That is, unless we've experienced virtuality.